had a rupture in my relationship with an avoidant partner, and I want to know how to mend it without compromising myself. It's a great question. There is a little background in here. My dismissive avoidant boyfriend returned after a 6-week break, but left for a trip a week after that. The break was triggered by him projecting his work and life frustrations onto me, which stemmed from a lack of boundaries. Before his crisis, he leaned slightly codependent, but now seems to be more avoidant due to past enmeshment. When he came back, he was affectionate and expressed that he missed me. Despite this, the break caused a major breach of trust for me, and I felt disappointed and hurt. He often handles conflict by withdrawing, hanging up, running away, or taking breaks. When I brought up this tendency to project his issues onto me, he still blamed me as the trigger, and instead of taking responsibility for his feelings and reactions. So there's really several questions here. How can I get him to understand the importance of taking responsibility for his thoughts and feelings instead of blaming me? How can we establish better boundaries in communication? After this breach of trust, how do I navigate this relationship in a way that avoids repeating the same cycle? How can I manage my disappointment and frustration around feeling like I have to revolve around or appease him? Okay, so there's actually quite a few questions here. I'm going to try to address this as well as I can. There's basically 4 topics here: communication, setting boundaries, how to move forward and break a cycle, right? And how do I manage my own feelings, needs, and boundaries in the situation? So for our inquirer, it's clear that they're feeling hurt and frustrated, and our feelings are always valid, right? So we start there by understanding that our feelings are valid no matter what the other person says, and that we are trying to make space for everyone to have their feelings, whatever they might be, right? So to address the first question, how can I get them to understand the importance of taking responsibility instead of blaming me? So this is less about trying to become a teacher to someone, because that's always going to be off-putting. And it's more about do not hide the consequences and the emotional impact of their behavior on you, right? By walking on eggshells around them, pleasing or appeasing them, right? Don't do that, because that's how you show them that it's important to take responsibility for your reactions to things. But we do verbalize this in such a way that the other person can hear it, right? We take into consideration their communication style, their attachment style, and that's usually going to allow things to land better, right? So you might say something like, these words feel like criticism or blame, and that hurts me deeply. I do want to contribute to your happiness, but this feels like I'm being made responsible for all of your emotions, and that's unsafe for me. Can we talk about how we can handle these moments together and make space for each other's feelings? Another way of saying this might be, this is important and I want to hash it out. Can we figure out a way to express ourselves without attacking each other? Is there a way for us to be allies instead of enemies with this? I want to be here for you, and it's tough for me too. Instead of running away, taking breaks, or leaving, you could say, I need a silent pause. I'm not going to leave the room, but I'm a little overloaded and I just need to slow down before I can help you with this. Now, if this is someone who continues to deflect, even though you're trying to create opportunities in this way, then it's a sign they may not be willing to confront their own patterns, at least not in the moment. So you can decide how much time you're willing to give them to go away and come back. And if they still are not able to address it head on, then that's when you really need to seek counseling or some kind of therapeutic support where you have a buffer in the room that creates this sort of objective perspective in the room. Now, how do we establish better boundaries? Well, boundaries really need to be clear, consistent, and they need to be upheld in action. So you let them know what your expectations are for communication. So for example, when conflict happens, I really need us to talk it through rather than walking away. Is there a way that we can agree on this as baseline? So maybe it's taking a 10 to 15 minute silent pause, but you're still in the same room together. You also want to decide what you are and are not willing to tolerate. So if this pattern of withdrawing and blaming is an ongoing cycle, then you yourself may need to take a step back and figure out, what do you need to do to protect your own emotional well-being? And then evaluate if you really want to continue with a relationship with someone who is unwilling to even acknowledge or address the impact of their behavior on you. Now, how do we move forward? After there is a breach of trust, there's really no way to navigate the relationship unless you address that breach of trust, because it's going to become like a knot in a tree. You may still interact with each other. You may pretend like it didn't happen. You may just keep moving on, but the knot is still there, and it's going to continue to accumulate psychic and emotional material. Okay. And so trust can really only be rebuilt if both parties are interested in working towards it, and that original breach of trust is addressed directly. You want to be honest about how that breach of trust really affected you. And so at that point, you're really extending an invitation for them to demonstrate their willingness and show up with consistency in their thoughts, words, and actions. Now, let's say they don't. Let's say they don't accept that. Well, now the task is to manage your disappointment and frustration and make sure that you're keeping that in check so that you don't wind up slipping back into people pleasing or trying to appease them, right? Because if you do, now you're operating from a place of attachment anxiety instead of consciously holding your values and priorities in relationship in highest priority and esteem. In other words, you're not advocating for yourself anymore and the relationship has become toxic to you. So you want to reflect on what you can control, and that is your reactions, your boundaries, and your choices. If you find yourself revolving around them or trying to appease them, you really want to pause and ask yourself, is this behavior in service of my greatest good and in service of my needs, or am I just trying to avoid a conflict? And so breaking a cycle is really about prioritizing your health and well-being and not ignoring the impact of someone else's behavior on your well-being. It is really natural to feel somewhat disillusioned or disappointed when someone falls short of your expectations of the relationship. And so you want to give yourself some time and space to kind of process those emotions. Obviously, doing these things in therapy can be supremely helpful, or even participating in one of my courses. In this case, I'd probably recommend the Courageous Communicator course because it's going to touch upon the questions you have around communication, but it's also going to introduce art therapy directives and somatic guided visualizations to help you not only say the right things at the right time, but process the emotional energy behind your words. Because communication is more than just the words we speak. It's the energy that we are expressing behind them. And that is not necessarily a verbal or intellectual thing. This is something that needs to be addressed on the body level and on the emotional level. Okay. And that is why my courses have experiential and visceral types of activities to do, so that you're not just thinking differently, you're also feeling differently. And that means you're showing up to your relationships with a different kind of vibe, let's say. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I recommend we'll put a link to the introductory training for the Courageous Communicator in the replay of this video. Okay, so I hope that helps answer that question. Also, remember to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week and I wouldn't want you to miss out.